Chapter 1: A House with Secrets. In the heart of the English countryside, where the air was crisp and the sky seemed to stretch endlessly, stood Ashbourne Manor. A sprawling estate surrounded by rolling hills and lush, emerald fields, the manor was as much a part of the landscape as the ancient oak trees dotting the horizon. Once the pride of the Statham family, its walls now bore the marks of time, peeling paint, ivy creeping over the stone facade, and windows that groaned against their hinges. For Eleanor Harper, the manor was more than just bricks and mortar. It was her inheritance, handed down through generations, and the last tangible link to her late grandmother, Catherine Statham. Ellie had spent countless summers at Ashbourne as a child, her feet pattering on its creaking wooden floors, her laughter echoing in its grand halls. It was here she had fallen in love with history, enchanted by her grandmother's stories of the manor's illustrious past. Now, standing in the vast, silent foyer, Ellie felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her. Catherine's death had left a void, not just in the family, but in the house itself. The once vibrant manor now felt hollow, its grandeur reduced to a haunting echo. Ellie, a historian by profession, found herself drawn to the challenge of reviving the estate. Her life in London had been fulfilling but predictable, with hours spent in archives and libraries poring over other people's stories. Ashbourne Manor offered her something more personal, a chance to uncover her own family's history and, perhaps, its mysteries. Whispers of the past. Even before Catherine's passing, there had been whispers of a hidden chapter in the Statham family story. Ellie had often overheard fragments of conversations between her grandmother and Margaret, a family friend. They spoke in hushed tones of a wartime romance, of choices made and opportunities lost. Catherine had once cryptically remarked, "Some stories are better left untold." But Ellie couldn't leave them untold, not now. She had always been curious about her grandmother's life during World War II, a time Catherine rarely discussed. There was a depth to her grandmother's gaze, a sadness that seemed to linger behind her warm smiles. In her final days, Catherine had clutched Ellie's hand and whispered, "Ashbourne holds more than memories. Look beyond the surface, Eleanor." The search begins. Determined to honor her grandmother's words, Ellie began exploring the manor, starting with the attic. The space was a historian's dream, or perhaps nightmare, overflowing with relics of the past. Dust motes floated in the dim light streaming through a small window as Ellie waded through boxes of forgotten treasures, family portraits, brittle newspapers, and furniture covered in white sheets. She spent hours sorting through the clutter, pausing occasionally to admire an old photograph or a hand-painted vase. It was late in the evening, just as the setting sun cast the attic in a golden glow, that Ellie's hands brushed against something unusual. Hidden beneath a pile of faded quilts was a small wooden chest. The chest was unassuming, its surface scratched and its lock rusted, but Ellie's heart raced as she opened it. Inside, nestled among dried lavender sprigs, was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. The paper was yellowed, the ink slightly smudged, but the words were legible. The first letter was dated June 1942 and addressed to dearest Catherine. Ellie's breath caught as she read the signature, "Yours always, Thomas Cavendish." Voices from another time. The letters told a story of love born in the shadow of war. Thomas Cavendish, an RAF pilot stationed near Ashbourne, had written passionately about his feelings for Catherine, his hopes for their future, and the challenges they faced. The words were tender, filled with both longing and courage. Every moment with you feels like a lifetime, Catherine, one letter read. I fear the war will take me away, but I hold on to the hope that we will have a tomorrow together. Ellie read each letter with a growing sense of connection to her grandmother, but also with questions swirling in her mind. Why had Catherine never mentioned Thomas? What had become of him? And why did these letters feel like a secret, hidden away in the attic for decades? As the hours slipped by, Ellie felt a deep sense of purpose taking root. She wasn't just restoring a house, she was uncovering a legacy. The love story between Catherine and Thomas was the key to understanding not only her grandmother but also the life and choices that had shaped her family. A new resolve. That night, Ellie sat in the grand library, surrounded by the flickering light of a fire. The letters lay spread out before her, their words echoing in her mind. She thought of Catherine's final words and felt a pang of regret that she had never asked more questions while her grandmother was alive. But Ellie also felt a spark of determination. She would find out what had happened to Thomas Cavendish and, in doing so, piece together the story her grandmother had left behind. As a historian, she had always believed in the power of the past to illuminate the present. Now, the past was calling her, and she couldn't ignore its voice. The journey ahead was uncertain, but Ellie knew one thing: Ashbourne Manor was more than a house. It was a bridge between generations, a keeper of secrets, and the beginning of a story that was waiting to be told. Chapter 2: The Archivist. The call for expertise. Ellie's discovery of Thomas Cavendish's letters had left her exhilarated yet overwhelmed. The more she read, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary wartime correspondence. The letters were raw, heartfelt, and deeply personal, but they also hinted at a mystery, an unfinished story of love and loss. Ellie knew that deciphering the full truth would require more than her own instincts and resources. It was then that she thought of James Wycliffe, the county archivist. James was something of a legend among local historians. Known for his meticulous research and uncanny ability to piece together even the most fragmented narratives, he was the person scholars turned to when all other avenues failed. James, however, was also known for his reclusive nature. He preferred the company of documents to people and rarely left his office at the local heritage center. Convincing him to take on her project would not be easy, but Ellie was determined. A reluctant ally. The next morning, Ellie drove to the heritage center, clutching the letters tightly in her bag. The center was housed in a modest brick building, its unassuming exterior belying the wealth of knowledge contained within. James's office was as she had imagined, cluttered, dimly lit, and filled with the faint smell of old paper. Stacks of books and files surrounded a man in his mid-30s, who was hunched over a desk with an intensity that suggested he had long since lost track of time. "Mr. Wycliffe?" Ellie ventured. James looked up, his piercing grey eyes narrowing slightly. "If this is about local genealogy, I'm booked for the next month," he said without preamble. "It's not genealogy," Ellie replied, her voice steady despite his brusqueness. She pulled out one of the letters and placed it on the desk. "It's history, personal and possibly important." Intrigued despite himself, James picked up the letter. His expression softened as he scanned the delicate handwriting, his practiced eye recognizing its age and authenticity. "This is interesting," he murmured. Ellie seized the opportunity. "There are more. They belong to my grandmother, Catherine Statham. I believe they might hold the key to a forgotten story. James leaned back in his chair, studying her with quiet skepticism. And you need me to help unravel it? Yes, Ellie admitted. But it's not just about the letters. I think there's more to this, something that connects to the war and maybe even beyond. I need someone with your expertise. After a moment's hesitation, James nodded. I'll help. But I'm doing this for the letters, not for you. Ellie smiled. I'll take it. Piecing together the past. Over the next few weeks, Ellie and James worked side by side in Ashbourne Manor's library, which had become their unofficial base of operations. While Ellie brought enthusiasm and personal connection to the task, James contributed his methodical approach and vast knowledge of wartime history. The letters revealed a deep and abiding love between Catherine and Thomas, forged in the fleeting moments they could steal during the war. Catherine, already engaged to another man, had found in Thomas a kindred spirit who made her feel truly alive. Look at this, James said one afternoon, holding up a letter. We'll dance under the stars when this is all over, Catherine. Until then, hold on to this promise. He shook his head. It's like something out of a novel. Ellie leaned over his shoulder, her heart aching at the words. He must have loved her deeply. But why didn't she ever tell me about him? James glanced at her. Perhaps the answer lies in what's not written. These letters are incomplete. There's no conclusion, no final goodbye. Something must have happened. The search deepens. Determined to fill in the gaps, Ellie and James turned their attention to wartime records. Using the dates and locations mentioned in the letters, they began tracing Thomas's squadron and its missions. The trail led them to the RAF archives in London, where they spent long hours poring over flight logs and casualty reports. It was exhausting, often tedious work, but Ellie found herself energized by James's quiet dedication. Though he had initially been aloof, his attitude began to soften as he saw how much the search meant to her. "You're relentless," he remarked one evening as they walked back to the train station after a long day of research. Ellie laughed. "Coming from you, I'll take that as a compliment." James smirked. It was meant as one. Most people give up when the answers don't come easily. You don't. Ellie felt a flicker of warmth at his words. I can't. This isn't just history, it's my family. And it feels unfinished. James nodded, his gaze thoughtful. Sometimes the past doesn't let go until it's been acknowledged. Maybe that's what this is. A growing connection. As the weeks turned into months, the partnership between Ellie and James deepened. They learned to anticipate each other's thoughts and worked in a rhythm that felt natural, even effortless. Outside of their research, they began sharing pieces of their lives, Ellie's childhood memories of Ashbourne Manor, James's love of literature and classical music. One evening, as they sifted through a particularly frustrating stack of incomplete records, Ellie sighed in exasperation. Do you ever feel like we're chasing shadows? James looked at her, a rare smile softening his features. Shadows, maybe. But they're leading us somewhere. And sometimes, the journey matters as much as the destination. Ellie returned his smile, feeling a sense of gratitude she couldn't quite put into words. In James, she had found more than an archivist. She had found someone who understood the pull of the past and the power it held to shape the present. The unfinished letters. Despite their progress, the final letters remained elusive. They had traced Thomas's squadron to its last recorded mission, a reconnaissance flight over the English Channel in late 1943, but the details were sparse. The mission had ended in disaster, with multiple planes reported missing. "This is where the trail goes cold," James said, his voice heavy with frustration. Ellie stared at the map spread before them, her mind racing. "There has to be something we're missing." Thomas wrote about surviving storms, about seeing her again. He wouldn't have just vanished. James studied her for a long moment. "You're not going to let this go, are you?" "No," Ellie said firmly. "Not until I know the truth." James sighed, but there was admiration in his eyes. "Then we keep searching." And so, they pressed on, driven not only by the mystery of Catherine and Thomas, but by the growing bond between them, a bond that, like the letters, held the promise of something yet to be discovered. Chapter 3: Shadows of the War. The coastal connection. The wind howled through the narrow streets of the small Cornish town, carrying with it the salty tang of the sea. Ellie and James had driven down winding country roads to reach this place, following the faintest of leads. Here, in this remote coastal community, Thomas Cavendish had flown his final mission. Their first stop was the town's modest library, where they combed through local newspapers from the 1940s. Reports spoke of an air raid on the Channel, planes lost to stormy weather and enemy fire. Among the listed casualties was Thomas Cavendish, his name etched in stark black print. But there was no certainty in the records, no definitive proof of his death. That sliver of ambiguity was enough to keep Ellie searching. It was in the churchyard, beneath the shelter of a centuries-old oak, that they met Margaret Hollins, a frail woman whose bright eyes betrayed a sharp mind. She had known Catherine Statham, though their friendship had waned after the war. "Catherine came here often during the war," Margaret said, her voice heavy with reminiscence. "She'd wait by the cliffs, hoping for a glimpse of the planes returning." And then there was Thomas. Ellie leaned forward eagerly. "You knew about him?" Margaret nodded. "He was a pilot stationed here. They met at a dance. It was like something out of a romance novel. But Catherine was engaged to someone else, a man her family approved of. Thomas was different. He gave her a way to dream beyond her duty." "And then he disappeared," Ellie murmured. Margaret's expression darkened. "Yes. His plane went down over the Channel during a reconnaissance mission." She was heartbroken but bound by her obligations. She married the other man not long after. An unexpected clue. The story deepened Ellie's resolve. "There has to be more," she insisted as they walked back toward the library. Thomas's disappearance wasn't the end of their story. It couldn't have been. James, ever the skeptic, studied her intently. "You're chasing something intangible, Ellie. Even if we find more about Thomas, it won't change the past." "No," Ellie said firmly, "but it might change how I understand it, and how I understand her." That evening, as they pored over RAF records in the library, James stumbled upon a new lead. "Look at this," he said, pointing to a faded medical ledger. A man matching Thomas's description was treated in a hospital in northern France months after his supposed death. No name, just the initials TC. Ellie's breath caught. He survived the crash? It's possible, James said cautiously. But if he did, why didn't he come back? Across the channel. The next morning, they boarded a ferry to France, their anticipation mingled with unease. The French countryside seemed to hold its own secrets, the rolling fields and ancient villages whispering of stories long buried. Their destination was a small hospital in St. Malo, one that had served as both a refuge and a battleground during the war. The records were incomplete, many lost to time and conflict, but they found mention of an English pilot who had been treated for severe injuries in 1944. The description was tantalizingly vague, yet it matched Thomas's age and appearance. The records ended abruptly, with no indication of where the man had gone after his recovery. A new witness. Their next lead came from a local historian, Etienne Bouchard, who had spent decades documenting the war's impact on the region. Etienne welcomed them into his cluttered study, where maps and photographs lined the walls. Many pilots who survived crashes were smuggled through resistance networks, Etienne explained. Some made it back to England. Others stayed in hiding, especially if they believed they were being hunted by the enemy. Ellie's heart raced. So, Thomas could have been part of the resistance? It's possible, Etienne said. But it's also possible he chose to disappear for other reasons. War changes people in ways we can't always understand. Etienne directed them to an elderly woman named Yvette Leclerc, who had been part of the resistance. Her small cottage, nestled on the outskirts of St. Malo, was filled with remnants of her wartime past, photographs, medals, and faded documents. Yvette listened patiently as Ellie and James recounted their findings. When they mentioned Thomas Cavendish, her eyes lit up. "Ah, the Englishman," she said in heavily accented English. "Yes, I remember him. He was injured, weak, but he had a strong spirit. We called him Le Survivant, the survivor." Ellie leaned forward. "What happened to him?" Yvette hesitated, her gaze distant. "He stayed with us for a time, but he was restless. He spoke often of a woman he loved, but he believed she was beyond his reach. One day, he left. Where he went, I do not know." Reflections in the night. That evening, as they sat by the harbour in St. Malo, Ellie stared out at the water, her mind a whirlwind of thoughts. "He survived," she said softly. "He survived, but he didn't come back to her." "Why?" James, sitting beside her, looked thoughtful. Maybe he thought he was protecting her. Or maybe the man he became after the war wasn't the same as the one she loved. Ellie glanced at him, surprised by the depth of his insight. "Do you ever wonder why we're so drawn to these stories?" James smiled faintly. "Because they remind us of what it means to be human. Love, loss, resilience, they're all part of who we are." Ellie nodded, a sense of peace settling over her despite the unanswered questions. "And maybe they remind us that even unfinished stories have value." James's gaze lingered on her, and for a moment, the connection between them felt as palpable as the sea breeze. Perhaps the best stories are the ones that leave us searching for more. As the tide rolled in, Ellie realized that their journey was no longer just about Catherine and Thomas. It was about uncovering truths, not only about the past, but also about themselves. And in that realization, she found a new kind of hope. Chapter 4: Love Rekindled. The final journey. The Normandy countryside was quiet, its rolling fields and stone cottages painted in the soft hues of a setting sun. Ellie and James arrived in the village with a mixture of hope and trepidation. Every step of their journey had brought them closer to this moment, yet neither of them had fully prepared for what they might uncover. The cemetery was tucked behind an old stone church, its weathered headstones nestled beneath the branches of ancient oak trees. The air was heavy with stillness, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves. It didn't take long to find it. A modest gravestone, partially overgrown with ivy, bore the name Thomas Cavendish. Ellie knelt before it, her fingers tracing the words inscribed below. "For my love, forever waiting." The handwriting was unmistakably Catherine's. Ellie felt the weight of decades pressing down on her. Here, at last, was the answer to the mystery that had haunted her family for generations. A love never forgotten. Margaret's voice from their time in Cornwall echoed in Ellie's mind. She never stopped loving him, even when the world told her to move on. Through Yvette and Etienne's accounts, Ellie and James had pieced together Thomas's final years. After leaving St. Malo, he had wandered Europe, too haunted by war and loss to return to the life he once knew. Eventually, he settled in Normandy, living quietly until his death in 1950. Catherine had found him, or what was left of him, years later. Perhaps she had come to say goodbye, or perhaps she had sought closure for a love that had defined her youth. The inscription on his gravestone told Ellie all she needed to know: Catherine had never stopped loving him. Even in his absence, he had remained a part of her, a silent presence in her life. Ellie stood in silence for a long time, her heart swelling with emotion she could barely name. There was sorrow for the love her grandmother had lost, but also admiration for the strength Catherine had carried through her life. Returning home. When Ellie and James returned to Ashbourne Manor, it felt different. The house, with its creaking floorboards and faded wallpaper, no longer seemed like a relic of the past, but a vessel for the stories that had shaped it. In the library, surrounded by the letters and photographs they had unearthed, Ellie reflected on everything they had discovered. "Do you think she was happy?" she asked James quietly. He considered her question for a moment. "I think she found peace in her own way. Sometimes love doesn't end the way we expect it to, but that doesn't make it any less real." Ellie smiled, touched by the simple wisdom of his words. "And maybe that's enough, to carry the memory of it and let it guide us." James stepped closer, his gaze steady. "We can't change the past, Ellie, but we can honor it by living fully. That's what Catherine would have wanted for you, for both of us." Ellie reached for his hand, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "Then let's make our story one worth telling. A new beginning." The restoration of Ashbourne Manor became Ellie's labor of love. Each room was carefully restored to reflect its original splendor, with special care taken to preserve the attic where she had first found the letters. Months later, the manor reopened as a sanctuary for history enthusiasts, its walls adorned with artifacts and displays dedicated to the Statham family. At the heart of the exhibition was Catherine and Thomas's story, their letters encased in glass, their photographs framed with care. Visitors were captivated by the tale of a love that had transcended war and separation, a love that had endured even in silence. Ellie often found herself recounting the story to guests, her voice steady but filled with emotion. A love rediscovered. As the years passed, Ashbourne Manor became more than a historical landmark. It became a place of healing and connection for those who visited. For Ellie and James, it was the foundation of their shared life. They married in the manor's garden, surrounded by the same flowers Catherine had once planted. Their story, of two people brought together by history and love, became as much a part of the manor as the bricks and beams that held it together. On quiet evenings, Ellie and James would sit in the library, reading aloud the letters that had brought them together. Each time, they found new meaning in the words, a reminder of the enduring power of love and resilience. A legacy of love. Years later, Ellie stood in the library, watching as a young couple read Catherine and Thomas's letters for the first time. The awe in their expressions mirrored her own when she had first opened the bundle. James appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "They're captivated," he said softly. Ellie smiled. "It's not just the story. It's the hope it gives. That even in loss, there's something beautiful to hold on to." James kissed her temple. "And that's why we keep telling it." The legacy of Catherine and Thomas lived on, not just in the letters or the walls of Ashbourne Manor, but in the lives they had touched. Ellie and James, inspired by the love and courage of the past, had built a future that honored it, a story worth telling, and one that would endure. The moral of the story weaves together universal truths about love, resilience, and the courage to embrace life despite its uncertainties and challenges. At its heart lies the idea that love, in all its forms, transcends time and circumstance, leaving a lasting imprint on the lives it touches. This lesson is beautifully illustrated through the intertwined stories of Catherine, Thomas, Ellie, and James. Love's timeless impact. The narrative of Catherine and Thomas reminds us that love is not confined to a single moment in time. Despite being separated by war and loss, their love endured. Even in Thomas's absence, Catherine carried his memory within her, a constant reminder of what it means to love deeply. Her actions, from her yearly pilgrimages to Normandy to her inscription on Thomas's gravestone, demonstrate that love, even when incomplete, can sustain and inspire us. This timeless quality of love resonates in every corner of the human experience. It teaches us that love is not diminished by loss or time, instead, it becomes a source of strength and guidance. Whether it is the romantic love Catherine and Thomas shared or the familial love Ellie feels for her grandmother, the story highlights the enduring power of affection and connection to shape our lives. Honoring the past without living in it. A significant theme of the story is the importance of honoring the past while remaining rooted in the present. Ellie's journey begins with a desire to uncover her grandmother's hidden history, driven by a profound respect for the woman who shaped her family. However, as she delves deeper, she learns that honoring the past does not mean being consumed by it. Catherine's story is one of both love and loss, yet it also reveals resilience. By continuing to live her life after Thomas's disappearance, Catherine demonstrated that honoring love's memory can coexist with moving forward. Her strength becomes a guiding light for Ellie, who finds herself inspired not only by her grandmother's story but also by the courage it took for Catherine to live fully despite her pain. Ellie's partnership with James brings this lesson full circle. As they piece together the fragments of Catherine and Thomas's history, they come to understand that their own lives are shaped by the choices they make today. By embracing the lessons of the past, Ellie and James build a future together, one informed by history but not overshadowed by it. The pursuit of truth as a path to growth. Another profound aspect of the story is the transformative power of seeking truth. Ellie and James's quest to uncover Catherine and Thomas's story is not merely an academic exercise, it becomes a journey of personal growth and self-discovery. Ellie's determination to unravel the mystery of her grandmother's life is driven by more than curiosity, it reflects a deep need to understand the roots of her own identity. As she pieces together the fragments of Catherine's love story, she confronts her own fears, insecurities, and desires. Through this process, she grows not only as a historian but also as a person capable of love and vulnerability. Similarly, James, who initially approaches the project with professional detachment, finds himself transformed by the experience. Working alongside Ellie, he begins to see history not just as a collection of facts, but as a tapestry of human emotion and connection. Their shared journey teaches him the value of stepping beyond his comfort zone, both professionally and personally. The choices we make today define our legacy. The story emphasizes that while the past shapes us, it is the decisions we make in the present that truly define who we are and what we leave behind. Catherine and Thomas's love story was left incomplete, yet its influence resonated through generations. Ellie's choice to restore Ashbourne Manor and preserve her grandmother's letters ensures that their legacy endures. Ellie and James's own story, meanwhile, is a testament to the power of choosing to live fully and authentically. By embracing their connection and building a life together, they create a legacy of their own, one that is informed by the past but firmly rooted in the present. Their marriage, their restoration of Ashbourne Manor, and their commitment to sharing Catherine and Thomas's story become a celebration of love's resilience and the courage to move forward. Living a life worth remembering. Ultimately, the story teaches us that a life worth remembering is one lived with love, courage, and resilience. Catherine and Thomas's tale is poignant and bittersweet, yet it is also a source of inspiration for those who come after them. Their love, though marked by tragedy, serves as a reminder that even in loss, there is beauty and meaning to be found. For Ellie and James, the journey to uncover Catherine and Thomas's story becomes a metaphor for their own lives. They learn to cherish the connections they have, to honor the lessons of the past, and to face the future with open hearts. In doing so, they create their own story, one that celebrates the enduring power of love and the courage to embrace life's uncertainties. The enduring moral. The moral of the story, woven through every chapter, is that love, resilience, and the courage to live fully are what make a life meaningful. While life may not always unfold as we wish, the strength of love, whether romantic, familial, or selfless, has the power to endure, heal, and inspire. It reminds us that honoring the past doesn't mean being trapped by it, but rather carrying its lessons forward. And above all, it underscores the importance of living a life that, like Catherine and Thomas's story, becomes a testament to the beauty and strength of the human spirit.